Oh, hi. I was just looking through the Bible. Have you ever wondered where civilization first began? You may not know it, but the Bible is full of clues that lead us to the very beginnings of civilization. Oh, by the way, I'm Arizona Smith. I'm an archaeologist. Archaeology means the study of beginnings, so that's my job, to search for clues to the beginnings of civilizations. Sometimes these clues are buried really deep. That's the case here. I bet you'd never guess this barren desert was once farmland, but it was. In ancient times, it was called Mesopotamia. That's Greek for between the rivers. The rivers are named the Tigris and the Euphrates, and in the book of Genesis, it's said that they flowed from the Garden of Eden. The Bible also has a lot to say about two great civilizations that flourished right here, Assyria and Babylonia. Now, around 150 years ago, some people got curious. They started to dig in the land between the rivers to see if the stories in the Bible were true. These photos from the very first American expedition to the area in 1889 show a team that was sponsored by the University of Pennsylvania uncovering the ancient city of Nippur. Pretty cool, huh? But the coolest part was that these early expeditions were uncovering evidence of a civilization that went back even further than the Babylonians and the Assyrians. They were discovering a lost civilization, Sumer.
It's hard to imagine, but more than 5,000 years ago, there were great cities on this barren desert. Cities with names like Nippur, Uruk, and Ur. In the Bible, Ur was described as the birthplace of Abraham, father of the Hebrew people. In 1922, an English archaeologist named Sir Leonard Woolley came to this desert on a mission. A minister's son, he was determined to find the lost city of Ur. He even brought his new wife, and they dug here for 12 years, despite terrible heat. But they found some amazing treasures. A lyre with a bull's head covered with gold. An upright ram grazing on a golden tree. And in the tomb of a queen, called Puabi, they uncovered a headdress of golden leaves and flowers studded with precious stones called lapis lazuli. The stones were a clue to the power of the city, for they were imported from far-off Afghanistan. Woolley and his team had uncovered a cemetery, including many large tombs for royalty. They found offerings of food and drink, and personal possessions indicating that the Sumerians believed in an afterlife. They also found evidence of a deathly ritual. Apparently, some Sumerian royalty did not pass to the afterlife alone. Woolley and his team found the bodies of 74 of a king's attendants who had sipped from a vat of poison and laid down near the king's tomb to die. The archaeologist was struck by how peaceful the bodies looked, as if they had gone willingly to serve their king in the next world. Today, in a storeroom at the University of Pennsylvania's Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, you can still see the evidence of this act 4,500 years later. There are earrings worn by women who attended the king, chokers of gold and lapis lazuli, headdresses with fragile golden leaves, and the golden hair ribbons worn by the women in their final hours of life. Now these objects lie in storage, precious clues to the first civilization.
In the royal tombs at Ur, archaeologists also found the world's oldest board game. had 6 dice, a lot of markers, and a beautifully decorated board. They found all the pieces in the tomb, but couldn't find the rules, just like at my house. You can still play a game just like it. Experts say it's a lot like backgammon.
The world's oldest civilization. Think about it. As far as we know, to this very day, the Sumerians were the first people to form a government, to write literature and history, to develop architecture, and to start an educational system. That's right, you have the Sumerians to thank for that. Or not. Of course, it didn't happen overnight. Somewhere around 8000 BC, way before this timeline begins, the people of Mesopotamia settled down to farm along the 2 rivers. Over time, they found they needed to work together to control flooding and save their crops, so they built irrigation canals. This cooperation led to more organization, to record keeping, and eventually government. The first cities built by the Sumerians appear around 3500 BC. They grew into independent regions or city-states, linked to each other by trade and a common language. By about 3000 BC, Sumer was thriving.
Rising from the center of many Sumerian cities was a huge stepped tower, or ziggurat, like this partially restored one at Ur. We can imagine what it looked like thousands of years ago, beckoning the people from miles around to come worship their gods. The Sumerians had at least 3,000 gods, and religion was central to their lives. Before the Euphrates River changed course, in the 4th century BC, much of the area around Ur was lush and green. Irrigation made food abundant and gave the people more time to think and develop their ideas. Not everyone needed to farm, so people became specialized as priests, craftsmen, scribes, and traders. In ancient times, Ur had a population of about 30,000 people. The Sumerians didn't have much wood or stone, so they built their homes of sun-dried bricks, mixed with straw to make them stronger, just like they do today. The interiors of their houses were probably similar to this one, too. In fact, the lives of the people who live in this area today provide many clues to the past. Women still bake bread the way they did in ancient times. And people sleep on platforms on the roofs of their houses to escape the heat, just like the Sumerians did thousands of years ago. In ancient times, Sumerian farmers grew wheat and barley and many kinds of vegetables. One of their favorite foods was dates from palm trees. They made a kind of bread with dates and a drink resembling wine. The Sumerians also kept sheep and goats for milk and cheese, butter and yogurt. But despite this healthy diet, archaeologists think that most Sumerians died before they reached the age of 40.
Archaeologists think that city-states in Sumer were first governed by councils of elders, senior citizens who knew a lot. But as the different states began to fight each other, a Lugal-Gal would rise to power. Lugal-Gal meant big man, and this guy would lead the state in battle. Eventually, the big man would become a king. The people of Sumer looked to their king as a god on earth. It would have been pretty fun to be a king in Sumer.
As the first civilization, the Sumerians were great inventors. Many of their achievements are just as important today. They were the ones who invented the wheel. Scholars think the potter's wheel probably came first, and then the Sumerians turned it on its side to make chariots and carts, and even toys with wheels. The Sumerians also made the first plow a big step forward. Their plows were made of bronze, pulled by oxen. To irrigate their fields, they used a shaduf, or water wheel, just like the ancient Egyptians. In their cities, the Sumerians were the first to use the arch, so important to the Romans later. Though their mud brick cities have not survived, like the stone pyramids of Egypt, archaeologists have revealed the impressive remains of their architecture. But the Sumerians' most important invention was writing. From their earliest pictographs, or little drawings, they soon moved on to develop a host of characters which stood for sounds. Most of what we know about the Sumerians comes from the tablets they left behind. Dr. Stephen Tinney of the University of Pennsylvania is an expert on this writing system called cuneiform. He's using a stylus with a wedge-shaped point, just like the Sumerians did to make their symbols.
And you can see that it's roughly a triangle, and that's why the writing is called cuneiform, because cuneus means triangle in Latin.
The university's Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology has a collection of lots of tablets inscribed by children in school about 4,000 years ago. This tablet has room for the teacher to write on the left and the student on the right.
A schoolboy describes what a hard time he's been having at school. This says in Sumerian, En nutarabi inim she inim mu nuzue. In this passage, the schoolboy is telling his father what a bad day he's had. He was late, so he was beaten. He spoke in class, so he was beaten. His handwriting was no good, so he was beaten. All in all, he gets beaten about 10 times in the course of this day. And the upshot is that he wants his father to invite the teacher home for a nice dinner so that the teacher will be a little kinder to him.
If a Sumerian boy worked hard and did his lessons well, he might aspire to become a scribe, someone who specialized in writing. Most of the tablets found by archaeologists are records or lists, but the Sumerians also wrote great literature, poetry, and history. The tricky thing is, civilizations which followed in this area, like the Assyrians and the Babylonians, used the same writing system to write their very different languages.
If kids in Sumer were the first kids to go to school, what was in their backpacks? Hey, what have you got in there?
Clay tablets. And boy, these things are heavy. Sumerian kids used them to write on.
Girls didn't have that problem. As in most ancient cultures, they stayed home and learned to cook and manage a home.
Well, they were lucky. The teachers could be brutal. They were called big brothers, and they sometimes beat you with a stick if you misbehaved.
I wonder what happened if you got sent to the principal's office. Learning to write cuneiform was really hard, too. Take a look at this. Boys would train for years to become scribes. But at least you'd have a good job if you could do it.
That looks hard.
Since most people couldn't sign their names, they would use a personal marker seal that would leave an imprint in the soft clay. Every seal was different and would identify who signed the document.
I like to have one of those.
Me too.
That's pretty cool. Do you think I can learn to write like that?
Nice try, but you may need to go to Sumer school.
One of the cool things archaeologists have found from ancient Assyria is a clay tablet written by a merchant 4,000 years ago. In it, he calls iron the metal from heaven. That's because the process of smelting iron from ore hadn't been invented yet. So the only iron the Assyrians had came from meteorites, which fell from the sky. Get it? Metal from heaven? Iron was so rare and valuable during this period that it traded for 8 times the value of gold.
Hey, Arizona.
Hey, Steph. What'd you learn in school today?
that it's a lot more fun learning to be an archaeologist than it was to become a scribe.
That's for sure. Boring. But, you know, I was just about to tell people how Sumer became a lost civilization. Want to help me with the timeline? Unfortunately, that brilliant civilization crumbled when the different city-states started to fight over water, which was becoming scarce due to too much irrigation.
That's too bad. But why did Sumer become lost to history for such a long time?
Well, if you start to crank, we can see why. Mesopotamia was a small but highly sought-after area, right in the middle of important trade routes. The history of the whole area was one of repeated invasions. Now, our timeline looks simple, but there were many other civilizations in the area as well. There were the Akkadians, the Neo-Sumerians, the Amorites, the Isin, the Larsa. Then the Assyrians were on top for a while, then the Babylonians.
Ew, that makes you dizzy.
Well, we're talking about hundreds, even thousands of years.
Tell me about the Assyrians. Those big stone figures of theirs look really cool. And scary.
Okay.
How do we remember the Assyrians, those infamous, cruel warriors in Bible stories? In some of the world's great museums, they're remembered mostly for the huge stone creatures which guarded their cities and palaces. With the body of a bull, the wings of a bird, and a human face, they were a combination meant to scare off intruders. Unlike the Sumerians, more than 1,000 years earlier, the Assyrians were blessed with natural resources, like stone and plenty of water. They built their cities with huge stone walls, with towers for archers to shoot at the enemy below. These walls, at the city of Nineveh, have been reconstructed with the help of archaeologists' drawings. We've learned a lot about the Assyrians from drawings like these by the great German archaeologist Walter Andre. In the early 20th century, Andre excavated another Assyrian city called Assur. It's hard to believe these ruins could have provided enough clues for Andre to depict how the great city probably looked 3,000 years ago. But that's what good archaeologists can do. Some Assyrian kings also left us a record of their exploits, carved in relief on the walls of their palaces. They obviously wanted to be remembered for their bloodthirsty deeds. Even their favorite sport was violent, lion hunting. One king boasted, "I killed 120 lions on my own feet, and 800 lions I killed from my chariot." But he was probably exaggerating and bragging. It was the king's sacred duty to protect his people, and the lion also symbolized the most powerful Assyrian enemies. And for the Assyrians, it seems, everyone was an enemy. Under King Sennacherib, by the end of the 8th century BC, the Assyrians became a virtual cyclone, conquering Babylon to the south, and then turning west towards the home of the Israelites. At the great walled city of Lachish, the army built a huge stone ramp, forcing its way into the city with an enormous battering ram. The Assyrians seemed unstoppable.
The Assyrian ruler Sennacherib had built a huge empire which stretched from Babylon and parts of Asia Minor to Israel. But the Assyrian reign of terror would not last much longer. Continuous revolts weakened the empire. In 612 BC, the Babylonians and their allies, the Medes, took their revenge and captured the Assyrian capital of Nineveh. Soon, the most powerful civilization in Mesopotamia was gone, never to return. Until not so long ago, much of what we uncovered about the Assyrians led us to believe that they were a vicious, warlike people. But new discoveries can change opinions. Just recently, we learned a lot more about the Assyrians.
In April 1989, workers at the buried palace at Nimrud stumbled on an air vent. Apparently, the surface they were cleaning was not the floor of the old palace at all, but its roof. Looking further, they discovered a small chamber with a closed sarcophagus, apparently untouched for 2,700 years. This Iraqi news footage is the only record of the incredible treasures they found. The tomb held the skeletons of a woman and a child, surrounded by more than 80 pieces of golden jewelry and other trinkets, crowns, rings, bracelets, and handsome vases of bronze and alabaster. The jewelry is beautifully made, revealing an appreciation of fine craftsmanship. This discovery shows that the Assyrians were not just warriors, but artists too. It gives us a broader picture of Assyrian civilization.
If you've read any of the Bible, you probably remember the name Nebuchadnezzar. It's such a great name. Well, after the fall of Assyria, it was Babylon's turn to prosper, and it was King Nebuchadnezzar who put them on the map. He built up his capital city of Babylon, surrounding it with a huge double wall. 8 gates led into the city. The most impressive and colorful one was called the Gate of Ishtar, the goddess of love. Shiny enamel tiles were decorated with images of the weather god, Adad, and the city's patron god, Marduk. It was a grand entrance for religious processions which would march through the gate all the way to the temple of Marduk. The temple was built in the form of a mountain, a ziggurat, just like the old Sumerian ones. In fact, we think this temple might have been the Tower of Babel in the Bible. For centuries, people identified this other tower as the Tower of Babel. Wrong. Archaeologists eventually determined that this tower was built 1,000 years later. That happens a lot in archaeology. Anyway, Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 43 years. In the Bible, he's remembered for invading Jerusalem. He destroyed the temple of King Solomon and sent all the important citizens of Jerusalem to Babylon. But just a few years after his death, the Persian king Cyrus the Great marched right through the gates of Nebuchadnezzar's city and seized power. Cyrus was not a harsh ruler, and Babylon would survive for centuries more, passing on the wisdom and achievements it had inherited from the Sumerians to other cultures, like the Greeks. So there we have it, 3 great civilizations from one small piece of land. And we didn't even talk about some of the other cultures. Not bad. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Clues from the Bible led us to the beginning of civilization. But there's still so much more to discover, more clues buried in the sand, waiting for future archaeologists to uncover. In fact, that's where I'm heading right now. Who knows? Maybe I'll find another lost civilization. See ya.